So is it visible?
Yeah.
So we're going to present on, we're going to kind of brief up with the whole essay. Um, a little about Saussure. He was a Swiss linguist and also a very famous semiotician and a philosopher. His most influential work was Course in General Linguistics, which was published after his death in 1916. He was also the father of modern linguistics. For him, language is very semiotic in nature. It is for him. It is like a self-contained, self-regulating semiotic system. And also, he says that language is a dynamic system of interconnected units. So, a little about his book, about his lectures, which his students had summarized. It is like one of the most seminal works in linguistics of the 20th century. It basically changed the whole subject, as Sir had mentioned. Um, Also, he had given some really important concepts like linguistic signs and the idea of signifier and signified. Basically, Saussure states that a linguist can develop a diachronic analysis of a text or theory of language, but he must also just look at it from the perspective of the present time, which was against the philological approach to language. A philological approach would be something that has to do with the history of a particular language. Basically, if we're trying to understand Gujarati language, we need not study its entire history from 18th century or 17th century. We can also look at it in the current times. Some of the expressions from the essay that Saussure had used were: language is a system of science that express ideas, a science that studied the life of science within society and is a part of social and general psychology. Basically, Saussure believed that semiotics was something that had to do everything with the science. So now, like in the essay, there are a few characteristics given about language, which is also like he has also tried to contrast both language and speech, which is also in his terms the difference between lang and parole. The first characteristic is that language is a well-defined object, and it is social, and it is the social side of speech. So, what he really means is that um, language language is made up of auditory images and concepts, and basically, just a second. So it is basically how a sound image would be associated to a concept. So now a sound image is is psychological and not a material concept. The psychological character associated with it will become apparent when we think about ourselves. Like when we're talking to ourselves, we don't really need to speak, but we can do that without doing so, because this is because the words of our language we regard the words of our language as sound images. And the second characteristic is that language is we can study language separately, unlike speech. For this, he says that, like, even if when we're studying the dead language, we can study it even if we don't speak it anymore. And the third characteristic would be language is homogeneous, whereas speech is heterogeneous. Language has to do essentially with the union of meaning and sound images again. And the last thing is that language is concrete. Even though it is psychological, it is not arbitrary. I'm sorry, it is not abstract. And the one of the most important concepts given by him is the concept of sign, signified, and signifier. So the linguistic sign unites not a thing and a name, but a concept and a sound image. Both terms evolved in a linguistic science are psychological and are united in the brain by an associative bond. The linguistic sign is then a two-sided psychological entity, the combination of a concept and a sound image. So, a concept and a sound image would be somewhat like two sides of a paper, and they're also interdependent. Um, Also, then the concept of signified and signifier. So Saussure proposes to retain the word sign, which designates the whole, and he proposes to replace the concept of sign image by signified and signifier, respectively. And now he proposes two principles of linguistic signs. The first one being the arbitrary nature of the sign. For Saussure, there is no essential or natural reason why a particular signifier should be attached to a particular signified. Saussure calls this arbitrary nature of the sign. And he has received like two objections against the arbitrary nature of sign. The first one being onomatopoeia, and the second one being interjections. But he has also arguments for this critique. Was that basically onomatopoeic words are limited in number and they vary in their representation in different languages. So, for example, for an English speaking person, a dog's bark would sound like bow bow, whereas for a French speaking person, the same thing might sound a little different, like ow ow. And so basically he says that onomatopoeia is something that is cultural, and similarly interjections are also viewed by him as cultural. So for example, if a French cook spills butter, she may say I, whereas an English speaker would say ouch. And yeah, so basically he says that interjections were words which also have had their own specific meaning at one point of time. And the second principle that he proposes is that the linear nature of signifier. So, by the linear nature of signifier, he means that signifier is something that is viewed in just one dimension or temporally. Whereas if we um, like the auditory nature or auditory signifier would be linear because they succeed each other and they form a sort of a chain, whereas if we view the visual signifiers, they are present in many dimensions. Now he also basically differentiates between the axis of simultaneities and the axis of successions. So for him, so an axis of simultaneity would be something that has to do with a synchronic approach, where a thing is viewed in the current or present time, but the axis of succession would be more of a diachronic thing, which is also viewed in the history of it. Over to Juhi.
Thank you, Amisha. Um, could you change the slide?
Sure.
Okay. So now in this part of the course, Saussure uses the image of chess game to in a way illustrate the differential nature of language, which is the synchronic and diachronic. So the function of language and the game of chess is similar because of their system of values and their observable modifications. So Saussure argues that the different pieces in chess and the different parts of language depend on each other. Furthermore, as language changes, it affects the entire system, just like moving a single chess piece changes the entire game. Uh, the value of chess pieces depend on their positions on the chessboard, just like the linguistic term, deriving its value from its opposition to all the other terms. So, I would like to assume that the game of chess explains the working of synchronic and diachronic with the association that to see language as being a chess game where the position of the pieces at a given moment is what counts is to see it from a synchronic perspective, and to give a historical approach is to view the language from a diachronic perspective. The third point, that the system is always momentary, it is always moving. And when he says that the set of rules exists before a game begins, he means that chess exists before any actual game. Like, it is not up to the players to decide on the rules of the game. So if you try to play chess with the rules of checkers, no one would like to play with you, or like they'll not be able to understand what you're playing. So when we play chess or use language, it's not about the pieces by themselves, but their perspective relationship within the context of the game setting and the rules. This leads us to how Saussure thinks of language as a system of inner relations between words that relate to each other and not the referential reality. Amisha, could you change the slide? Okay, so now the linguistic value from the conceptual viewpoint. When we think of a word, we tend to think of an idea that is associated to it. And when we think of that idea, it to some extent also includes the linguistic value which is connected to that idea. However, value and the signification is different, because if value was same as signification, then language would just be a naming process. So language is not just a naming process because that concept holds a value, and it's not just purely a signification. So the example of sound image which Amisha talked about. So if we look at that example, that the union of sound image with concept would lead us to believe that a word would be both independent and self-contained. While the concept may seem to be counterpart of the sound image, the sign itself is a counterpart of the signs in a language. If that is understandable. So the terms are interdependent and derive their value from the presence of the other terms. So by that he means to say, just a second. So these concepts are not defined by their positive content, but negatively by the relation with other terms in the system. So they are known as what they are not instead of what they are. So they are more precisely defined by the characteristics what characterizes them from being not the others. Like just like let's take the example of the chess piece. So the king, one single piece. It is not what the king is, but it is what the character, the characteristic of the king, which is different from the others. Like what it is not, like the knight. So the king is how it is different from the knight that makes the king a king. So that is what he's trying to say. Uh, Also, in yeah, like I said, the terms are interdependent in language. So the value of each term results from the simultaneous presence of the other. So if there is just a king, there would be no value of the king. To For the king to have the value, there needs to be a knight, there needs to be a soldier, there needs to be a queen. So in that way, even in language, the terms are interdependent. And uh, so he gives two points of a dissimilar thing and a similar thing. So let's say the value of a 1 rupee coin will be considered higher or lower based on the coins placed with it. So a dissimilar thing can be okay. So first example of a comparison between a dissimilar thing. Uh, a dissimilar thing can be exchanged for a thing of which value has to be determined. Like 99 rupees can equate to 18,000 seconds of talk time. Thus, the value is set by comparison with a dissimilar thing. Like rupees and rupees are not compared. Rupees and seconds of talk time are compared. So in that way, the value is set with comparison with a dissimilar thing. And secondly, similar things can also be compared to determine the value, like rupees and rupees. Like if I keep a 1 rupee coin, I can understand its value by placing other coins. So with that, I can understand what that 1 rupee coin, what value it holds. So yeah, so therefore a word can be exchanged for an idea. Like house is similar to home, but they have differences within them. Since the word is a part of system, the signification and also the value are based on other members of words in the system. Two words with the same idea will lead to eventual death of one. And when a plural or inflectional change is added to the word, we get a whole new signifier and signified, which Stavan will cover ahead. Okay, now, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jui. So now I'll head on to linguistic value from a material viewpoint. And just as Jui talked about how the conceptual uh, viewpoint of a linguistic value from a conceptual viewpoint, there are relations and differences which give it its value, and there is no inherent value. There is no positive connotation to the linguistic terms. So the phonic, for example, the material element that uh, for a language is the sound. The sound image is considered of sound, and it is that the phonic aspect of a word does not inherently have a direct relation with what is being signified. So It's just like the example that it is not the metal of the coin that gives its value, that there is more metal, so there is more there is more metal, so there is more value of the rupee. It is the actual uh, it is the geopolitical location in which the currency is being used and the printed amount on the coin which gives it its value. And similarly, the phonetic sound of the signifier does not have a direct effect on what the signifier signifies, right? And similarly, as it is written in the PPT, for language the signifier gains value not by the shape of a letter or solely its phonetic aspect, but the differences between sounds that are used in a particular socio-cultural dimension. So I can write T in any way, letter A in any way, in cursive or in normal writing, or italicized, but it does not have any effect. And similarly, the sound, for example, in the French, R can be similarly used as in the German dock, DOCK. The CH sound of German is similar to the French sound of R, but that does not have any uh, change in the signified. So it is there that the uh, yeah, so every language forms its words on the basis of a system of sonorous elements, each element being a clearly a delimited unit and one of a fixed number of units. So basically the differences between these units, the differences between these linguistic units make it what it is, the relational possibilities. So there are a set of letters. For example, English has 26 and all are pronounced differently, each letter, but it is the difference between the pronunciations of those letters and the relational possibilities in which we what make a letter, and therein that they make a sentence, which gives value to those linguistic um, s- uh, which gives value, and which is like the semiology of linguistics. And Amisha, can you please move on to the next slide? Yeah. And so these are four important notes in the linguistic value from a material viewpoint. First is that signs are arbitrarily decided, as it is emphasized earlier too, and there exists no connection between the letter and the sound it designates. So it's not like the letter A and it being spoken according to some word or according to a cultural significance, as if they are not, as if they are connected. They are not. It is the phonetic difference is what is making A. So we can use cat and mat similarly, but I would use ahead in a different way, where it consists two A's. So it is not as if there are specificities in the shape of the letter and the sound that is designated to it. It is completely arbitrary, but it's the social cultural dimension that gives it its value. Moreover, the value of letters is purely negative and differential. So there is no inherent value for the letter T when, if it is given to you without the other 25 letters of the English alphabet, right? And moving on, the fixed system of letters and differences between the letters in it constitute the value of a sign as a whole. So by this, Saussure means that the entire system of letters, it constitutes 26 letters, for example, in English, and all the and what and the relational possibilities and the differences that are that arise between them makes uh, um, gives rise to the value of a particular letter in it, and the means by which a sign is produced is unimportant. It's, for example, you can you can write the letters in any way. The way the sign, the shape of the sign, the sound of the sign alone cannot make up for the value of the sign. The value arises purely from difference, where this is something very similar what Derrida echoes, but like we'll keep that part for the next time. Amisha, can you move on to the next slide? Thank you. Now this is like somehow a gist of this entire paper by Saussure. So Saussure starts with this, what me, Juhi, and even Amisha had repeated uh, all over. So it is that in language there are only differences in negation. There are other systems in which there are positive units. For example, if you are considering, uh, let's say, two different sports, be it cricket and football. So cricket has its own value. It has players and a set of rules, and football has its own set of rules. They are positive connotations that they can be understood by themselves. But in language, the units in the signifier and the signified, they cannot be understood as positive entities. They do not have any value of their own besides being rendered by the differences in negations. So there is a although Saussure then moves on to say that the negative nature only has validity when we consider the signifier and the signified distinctly, and not as constituted in a sign. So a sign has signifier and a signified. And as Sachin said, explained the other day, that language is a system of code. So the code rests in our mind, and and the code. So these codes, uh, they make us understand. So they are, they are, let's say, ingrained to us in by socio-cultural dimension that we are in, right? So uh, that is what the codes are, right? And the signifier and the signified are connected by that. Now the signifier in itself does not have any value of its own, and the signified does not have any value of its own. It is just the associative the associative value that comes when they are put in difference, when there are two kinds of different signifiers, and signify and the signified. So the difference between the signifier and the signified, as well as the difference between two signifiers. But a sign itself has uh, two uh, two units, which are the signifier and the signified, and both of them are existing in difference, right? In associated in relational possibilities, right? So a sign itself can be a positive aspect, and the different signs can exist in difference, but not in pure difference, just as the signifier and the signified exist. Moreover, certain diachronic facts do come under consideration when there are historical alterations. Example, phonetic alteration in a signifier. For example, what is associated to the word cat right now, or to the, for example, let's say bat. Now that can mean anything. It can be a cricket bat, or it can be a bat the animal, right? So a particular signifier can be associated to two different signifiers, and it is the historical change that can be assessed in this. But the historical change does not account for why this happened, right? It is the synchronic study which Saussure emphasizes, which makes us understand which makes us understand linguistics in a better sense, or sorry, the language in a better sense. Now a particular signifier can even point to two different ideas being signified, just what I explained right now. When comparing the signs entirely sorry sir, are you saying anything?
No, go on.
Okay. When comparing signs entirely, there can be only distinctions and not pure difference. Now if I'm comparing two signs, let's say a burger and a pizza, or father and mother, right? So they do not exist in pure difference. They are in opposition. They are distinct. A father and a mother are distinct, right? But they do not exist in pure difference, just like the signified and the signified. They exist, right? So there are distinctions. But what Saussure emphasizes furthermore here is that these distinctions, these oppositions, like father and mother, right? That is what language is entirely constituted of. And moreover, he goes on to even put this in unit. So what he says, that unit is a segment of speech, like a spoken chain, It's a sound aspect, right? And that corresponds to a concept. Now, a unit, a linguistic unit, it corresponds to some concept which we understand, and they are in, associative. They have associative value. What sets the unit apart is what defines it for a differential relationship. Whatever distinguishes one sign from the other defines it or constitutes it, right? So the differences between these units make uh, make the make the semiology of language possible, right? It they exist in difference, and there is no value when value or conceptual understanding if I just term a unit to you. So we have to understand units just as we understand signs in signified and signified. For the social language itself exists in binary opposition, which is like further uh, as which further constitutes the entire theory of structuralism. So sir, that was pretty much it.
Right. So that's quite comprehensive. Any questions, queries, doubts about this? You can type it so that others can also.
Sir, I myself had a doubt. Like I did explain the section of unit, but that was like whatever that I could not explain it, very clearly. So can you
Which
give more clarity on it's the final section, page number 70, the very last paragraph until the end. Like what does he mean by units and grammatical facts should not be confused with linguistic signs when made up of something besides differences?
Yeah, so what he's saying that difference, right, is between say per and ter, right? But they are not signs. Like say for example, pizza and burger, right? They are signs. So per and ter is constituted by difference completely, but pizza and burger, to continue your example, would be more of an opposition rather than difference, right? So he says that signs are uh, not based on difference but oppositionality. So binary, like father and mother, right? The dark and light and so on and so forth. The idea, the conceptual part of it is often defined in terms of opposition, while the phonetic part of it, right, is constituted by difference. I hope you get it. And he's considering both these things in totality in the last section. So he's saying that per and ber are different, right? And there are no positive elements in language. They are only constituted through differences, right? But when it comes to sign in its totality, they are based on oppositions. Some oppositions are more important than others, and so on and so forth. That's what he's saying. If you look at page 71, language in a manner of speaking is a type of algebra consisting of solely complex terms. Some of its oppositions are more significant than others, but units and grammatical facts are only different names for designating different aspects of the same general fact, the functioning of linguistic oppositions. So two aspects of language that he is looking at. One is the psychological aspect, that is the conceptual part. Like a word tree stands for that idea of tree that you carry in your mind, the signified tree, right? And it exists in opposition to, say, for example, animal, right? But the sound tree, right, itself is through differences from other sounds that it exists. So at two levels, there is two different kind of relations that linguistic system has. I don't know whether that's helpful. Stavan?
Yes, sir, it is. Thank you.
And it continues. Look at the last paragraph where he says, put in another way, language is a form and not substance. Right? We are going back.
It's very it's to Plato, and in some sort he also invokes Kant in talking about that a priori knowledge, and then we understand it.
Right. So substance is the Aristotelian term, right? If you remember, primary substance and secondary substance, while forms are Platonic. Okay.
Yes, sir.
And that's why formalism and structuralism are clubbed together, because both of them seem to emphasize the form, right? Not the specific content. So if you are looking at a poem from a structuralist perspective, you are looking at the grammar of that poem. That is, what are the rules to which this poem obeys, right? Rather than what does it mean, right? So the question shifts to how does it mean, right? What is the mechanism which communicates the meaning of the poem rather than what is the meaning of the poem. And according to people like Jonathan Culler, he would say that structuralism onwards, there was a shift beyond interpretation, right? So in a sense, literary criticism was supposed to be a kind of hermeneutic, in the sense that it has to interpret, it has to explain what the meaning of poem is, rather than explain how it means, right? So a typical structuralist reading of a poem would look at conceptual oppositions on which the poem is built, right? Love and hate, red and blue, or whatever, and so on and so forth, right? So structuralism shifts the orientation of literary criticism from interpretation to explaining how that interpretation happens, rather than what is the meaning of the poem or the novel, right? So you can see that it has taken a very different kind of orientation. Okay, so Jaldi asks, isn't the rule of linear nature of signal contradicted when we talk of value? No, linear nature of signifier has something to do with the axis of combination and axis of selection, right? That is the paradigmatic and syntagmatic, right? But value is about the position of each thing in entire system. For example, the traffic signal, right? You may make it stand upside down, or you can even make traffic signal horizontal, right? So green, yellow, red. Value of red is determined in relation to yellow and green, but its signification is what? It means stop. That's the difference.
So value is key to you in the way.
I'm not sure of that. No, value is more about what is the place of that object in the system. For example, consider a system of currencies, right? So you can exchange similar currencies, like 90 rupees can be exchanged for $1, right? But it can also be exchanged for object, right? So the exchange values operate in values. So the meaning has something to do with exchanging different things, like red color does not have anything to do with stop, right? The principle of arbitrariness says कि लाल कलर को और रुकने से क्या लेना देना है, या ग्रीन कलर को आगे बढ़ो से क्या लेना देना है, कुछ लेना देना है नहीं, right? So they are dissimilar but can be exchanged. Like green color stands for go ahead, but that green color itself is determined within the system of red, blue. Because if you take green color out of that traffic signal system, it may mean anything on whatever system it is located. If you put it in religious symbolism context, then green color may stand for Islam, right? Same color can have a different meaning based on, and that meaning is called signification, right? So it is two ways in which meanings are delimited or organized in a linguistic system. And he gives example about how between two languages you can have significance which is similar, like mutton, but values will differ, because mutton does not mean mutton but sheep, right? That's the example he has given. right? So value and signification. Value is about place of a particular item in language in relation to other elements of the same language. That is what value is. And signification is relationship between that item of the language with something outside of that system. And what Stavan was saying about Derrida actually engages with Saussure, right? He builds his theoretical foundation on Heidegger and Saussure, right? So he is building upon Saussure. So in some way, he is critiquing Saussure from an Heideggerian perspective.
Sir, but the only difference would be, Derrida acknowledges it is as a chain of signification instead of an end, being signifier and signified.
Right. Right. And at the same time, he is critiquing the metaphysical basis of Saussurean system, right? By metaphysics, he means metaphysics of presence in Heideggerian philosophical terminology, something that if I start discussing, will go into entirely different direction right now. But I'm just telling you what Derrida does later on, right? So post-structuralism does not mean that structuralism is finished. Some of the key ideas of post-structuralism are very much present in structuralism. And what are those? The idea of difference, right? Arbitrariness, and idea of language being social rather than individual, right? So these are some of the assumptions that are carried forward into post-structuralism through structuralism. At the same time, there is a critique of metaphysics that is underlying Saussurean structuralism that you find in Derrida. So post-structuralism का मतलब ये नहीं कि structuralism reject कर देते हैं. It means that it critiques certain aspect of structuralism, but it seemed to also accept some of the ideas of structuralism. Clear? So the object of literary study also changes, right? Instead of what is the meaning of this poem, people will ask, because poem is a text, right? So the focus will be on the language that produced that poem. By language, you mean set of rules that produce that particular text, right? The set of oppositions and differences that one. So, and that can be extended. So if you're studying fashion, you're no longer studying what is the meaning of a particular clothing, but what you are asking is that what is the grammar of that fashion? What are the set of rules underlying production of that particular garment that you are wearing, right? So if you are focusing on the recipes, then you won't be focusing on the particular cuisine, but a system which produces that cuisine. I hope you are getting what I'm saying, because language is seen as a semiological phenomena, and that's why the model of linguistic analysis that Saussure talks about is extended to the analysis of other aspects of culture as well, like fashion, like clothing, like wrestling.
Suggests that language is semiologic.
Right. It is part of greater signaling system of culture. It's one of the signaling system, but for Saussure, that is the model that he uses to understand.
Framework.
So if somebody asks you what is structuralism, then you can also say that Saussurean principles which use language, analysis of lang rather than parole, right? And secondly, and that is what we mean by structure. Lang is the structure, right? It's abstract, not abstract, but concrete for him, right? And it is homogeneous. And that is again very similar to Plato's idea of forms which are perfect, while the particular objects that you find are imperfect. So there is a kind of Neoplatonic or Platonic turn that you find. And this is a turn away from positivism, right? So in some sense, those who are doing their literary criticism with me, by the 19th century, we were looking at realism and naturalism as extensions of positivism. And by positivism, you mean that you use scientific methodology in social sciences, right? And study of language and culture is social science. So when you're using scientific methodology in human sciences, you are being positivist. And positivism, one of the characteristics was empiricism, right? And the methodology was a kind of deductive one. That means you observe a set of phenomena and then draw conclusions basis of your empirical observations. So that when it is applied, so if you are taking a kind of survey or statistical data, quantitative analysis, then you are doing empirical survey, right? Very often. And Saussurean turn is going away from that positivist approach. But Derrida would, in his very famous essay on structure, sign, and play in human sciences, one of the most important essay in post-structuralism, would point out that even structuralism was part of the same metaphysical frame to which positivism belongs, right? So there is no dearth of empiricism even in structuralism. So it is not, though it claims to be going away from positivism, it is still not free of metaphysics. That's Derrida's critique of structuralism.
I have a slightly off-topic question. So who decides that who will be listened to? I mean, somebody might have said something similar before Saussure, and he might have not been recognized. And what point did people decide that we'll listen to Saussure now?
Okay, so what Jaldi is asking is how, on what, who should we listen to? Should we listen to Derrida or Saussure or the person before Saussure? And the person who came before Saussure is became the person who was most listened to later on, and his name was Friedrich Nietzsche, right? So who should you listen to? You have to decide using your own mind in Kantian scheme of things.
No, what I meant was philology had been going on for ages before Saussure came up. And Saussure came and turned this whole plane around, and there was a revolution probably in the study of language. But that change, as it is has always been difficult to digest for everybody. So no, and I'm pretty sure the people would have critiqued him earlier when he came around. But then gradually people accepted this new way of learning language.
Studying language.
Yeah. Studying language. So it could have just, who decides that this, is there like there is obviously no panel of judges over here, but who decides that we shall follow this this line of studying or this line of studying or this method?
Okay, what she's asking that how to decide what we should follow, basically, right? On basis of what? Right. So for that, remember, knowledge, there is no last word, right? Human knowledge is in the course of
That's what Derrida says.
movement, right? Right. So no, there is no last word. So that is not even the last word of Derrida, right? Right. So last word aise hote nahi. So what you do is very often consistent with what you want to study. Right. So what do you want to study? Are you going to study the language or are you going to study the text? So very often what your research focus is determines its methodology in some way, right? So methodological approach are the debates rather than settled frames, right? So ऐसे नहीं कि एक बार Derrida get of Saussure को फेंक दो. That is not a linear way in which knowledge proceeds, right? We are still talking about Plato and Aristotle almost 2,500 years after that, right? So it does not exhaust itself. So instead of asking who is the final word and the best, is the current methodology the best one? How I would look at it is, if I'm going to do a structuralist project, then I will take post-structuralist critique of structuralism on board, right? Uh, and maybe then decide what I'm going to do, right? Rather than say that मैं सिर्फ structuralism ही करूंगा, Derrida नहीं देखूंगा, या Derrida देखूंगा, Saussure नहीं देखूंगा, that kind of thing, right? I hope you get what I'm saying. We have to take
Sir?
this debate. Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, so what she said and what I understood is that she's asking that who decides a particular word or particular language that we are speaking or we are learning in. So that's what Saussure is trying to say here, that the whole thing is signifier and signified, and you learn it by when you are when you take birth and you socialize yourself with other people. Like from the very beginning, we are made to learn that this is your mother and this is your father. So it's already set of rules that we are learning.
No, that was not her question. What she is trying to ask, that Derrida has critiqued Saussure and Saussure has critiqued philology, right? And he has also critiqued the earlier approach, where it is, and there is a critique of Platonic approach, interestingly. Plato talks about something called cratilism, where he talks about how words point towards the object, like bottle hai, the bottle ka meaning ye hai, right? That is, language is a system of naming. That was an entrenched belief, and he is questioning that the meaning of the word bottle is not this object, but to the concept of the bottle, right? The signified of the bottle. So he is critique back, and if you look at what critique he has offered on page number पेज नंबर 60, जब आप ऐसे मान लेते हो कि वर्ड बॉटल का मतलब ये बॉटल है, तब इट इज एज इफ देयर इज रेडीमेड आइडिया ऑफ वर्ड बॉटल, राइट, which pre-exist your knowledge of that bottle. So that becomes psychologism, and something which he wants to avoid. So language does not set up relationship between word and the thing, but between concept and the sound, or concept and a letter. So he's changing what we mean by language in the first place, right? So that is a revolutionary shift that he is bringing about, right? So what happens is that you cannot go back to that old Kratelian framework, right? That naive way of thinking about language as a system of naming things, right? So you have to take these critiques on board, whatever you are doing.
Because of process of learning and
Unlearning, relearning, yes. And especially with these kind of phases where there was this major shift that happened. Like, say, for example, Newtonian frame, right? Newton assumed that there is something like a vehicle moving at 5 kilometers an hour. आपकी गाड़ी 65 किलोमीटर से per hour जा रही है, ऐसे वो मान लेता था. But behind that was an assumption that there is a kind of universal observer in reference to which everything is moving at 65 kilometers per hour. But Einstein would come in and say that suppose there is the observer is located in another vehicle which is moving at 40 kilometers per hour. तो फिर उसको जो 65 किलोमीटर से चलने वाली गाड़ी 25 किलोमीटर से जाती हुई दिखेगी, right? So almost something similar is happening here. You cannot go back to earlier frames without taking on board these critics. That is what we have to keep in mind. So her question was, should we listen to Derrida, should we listen to Saussure, or should we listen to the traditional criticism which is? So what I say is that you don't listen to only one of them.
So what happened to philology?
And then take your call. So that's a very good question.
Because
In fact, text will come back, with a vengeance.
Sir,
Right.
philology was used in
And,
the genealogical approach by Nietzsche, I guess.
Pardon?
Philology was used in the genealogical approach by Nietzsche, I guess.
Right. And Nietzsche is revived after 60s. After World War, Nietzsche becomes all the more, especially after failure of Marxism in 1968.
Yes, sir.
Right. By 1968, what was happening? All this is in 1920s or 30s. ये जो structuralism है ना, ये बहुत 30s 40s में होगा. I'm not very sure of it. Maybe 50s. But after 60s, what had happened that classical Marxism could not be accepted, right? Because in spite of revolution in China and in Russia, there was no egalitarian society, but totalitarian societies. So Marxism gave birth to dictatorships. So there was a disillusionment with Marxism in 50s onwards. But even then, some people like Sartre would hold on to Marxism. And by 1968, there was a student revolution that happened in France. And many philosophers like Sartre and Foucault and Derrida and many others, Deleuze, would participate in and support students' revolution. But then what happened was it fizzled out, right? And it made the authority more trenchant. So this failure of 68 uprising in France was a kind of phase shift, right? And that is where people started going back, rethinking what. So they went back to the Frankfurt School. They went back to Gramsci, who was rethinking Marxism, right? Something called the New Left. So Gramsci is trying to explain why the revolution does not happen. That means why are oppressed people not opposing the oppressors, right? So he came up with theory why that is not happening, which other people like Louis Althusser will follow. Even Foucault will follow the same model, post-Gramscian kind of left, right? So it's not the classical Marxist left of Sartre. It is more Gramscian new left that emerges after 68 uprising. So the failure of student uprising corresponds to the failure of why revolution did not happen, right? So that is the historical context in which even, and that also comes back to your question, we have to understand these ideas in their historical context as well, right? So you have to understand that Saussure is critiquing philology, just like Romanticism is a critique of classicism, right? And modernism is a critique of Romanticism. And postmodernism is a critique of modernism. So you have to situate these developments in their historical context as well. So that is how we should be looking at it, if it answers your question. Right. So we cannot really go back and say, "Oh, 19th century wala Marxism aaj kaam aayega." We cannot do that.
Reframing of
We have to reframe ideas, just like Plato was reframed. Rethought in a different context, right? Critically rethought in a different context. Very important question. I hope you understood what she was trying to say. And what Jayesh seems to be saying is taken over by Althusser, right? So to believe that language is social and mother and father are oppositions within language, right? So what happens is that you take your place within language. And that is how you take your place within the social frame. So ideology for Althusser is not the ideology that, a theory of ideology that Marx propounded, right? For Marx, ideology was a kind of reverse image, upside down view of base and superstructure, right? But for Althusser, it is more like what positions you are caught up in language, right? So he calls that interpellation. So you are interpellated when somebody says, "Oh, this is a girl" or "this is a boy." Your place in this binaristic linguistic structure is fixed. Your place in society, your value and your significance in society is determined by the structure in which you happen to be born. Right? So that's a structuralist view of Marxism that Althusser is proposing. Right? And Lacan, who was his, I think, who taught him, Jacques Lacan, would say that unconscious is also structured like this thing. And he argues that dream work is very much on the lines of figurative, its linear value, linear notion of sign. And he in some way anticipates Derrida when he says that, so Derrida takes from Freud, who is read through Lacan, Jacques Lacan, right, and Nietzsche and Heidegger. So that these are the three moments of deconstruction for Derrida. So what does it mean when Lacan says language is structure like language? It means that जिस तरह से ये स्ट्रक्चर है लैंग का, वैसे ही अनकॉन्शियस का भी स्ट्रक्चर वैसा ही है, लैंग जैसा, लैंग पैरोल में. Any question? Any more questions? There is one question again, Jaldi has asked about homophones. Homophones are two words that have similar sound.
Yes.
Right? Liver, pun जैसे है ना, जिसका signifiers एक जैसे है, signified अलग है. Right? Which again conforms to what he is trying to say, that conceptually it is about opposition. Though at the level of signifier, it is more of a difference. So even if there is no difference in signifiers, there is a opposition in terms of concepts.
So values attach होता है.
हाँ,
Right.
values अलग हो जाते हैं.
हाँ.
They occupy different place in the conceptual scheme. Conceptual side, उसके बाद to use his language, right? Okay. Any more questions? Okay. So who is going to make presentation in the next class?
Sir, we are going to present the second essay, so shall we?
Okay. So tomorrow or the day after? Tomorrow or the next week? Tomorrow, I'm not sure whether we'll have classes.
Sir, let's keep it next week, no?
Okay, so which one are we taking up? Art as technique?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And if there is an announcement of examination, then I may take your extra classes on the weekdays. That is Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It all depends on because I have heard that they are going to be declared. Yeah.
All right, sir.
Bye.
Kya? What? Who said?
Bye. 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 Declared bye.
Bye. Hey, bye. I'm not sure. Aata hai, I will definitely let you.
Sir, tentative dates, could you please tell us?
पता होगा तो मैं बता दूंगा. Tentative भी. और जनवरी में है, उतना पता है. This is as tentative as it can get. So it all depends. Right.
So, sir, are you going to take the extra lecture from this week itself?
Most probably I will have to. Means if the exams are declared in near future, then I will have to finish this.
Okay, sir.
So keep your presentations ready, all of you.
Yeah, sir.
Yes. Okay. And who is going to do the next presentation? That is on Baptin. You went there, yeah. You may want to take somebody's help if you
Yeah, we have tried contacting a few people.
Okay,
And then
fine. And structural analysis of narrative is actually demonstration of how structuralism works in analysis of literature, right? Was Vetten Todorov guy, structural analysis of narrative. So who is going to do that? Anyway, you put that in the group. So we'll stop for now. So I will inform you about tomorrow, right? Okay. So in case something comes up, then we can also meet late, maybe from 3 to 4 or 3 to 5, I say. If not from 1:15 to 3. Right. So I will inform you about that tomorrow. Okay, so see you
Thank
soon.
you, sir.
Bye, sir.
Yeah.